Welcome to the FileMaker Lab. In this virtual space, we explore what developers in the Claris FileMaker space are doing, their successes and their stumblings. We also invite to the workbench those people who are doing work in technologies around our FileMaker world, which is to say, pretty much any technology. So join us in the FileMaker Lab. Today, the lab is open, and I am your host for this episode. I am Jeremy Brown of Integrating Magic, and I'm glad to be with you. As I open the door to the FileMaker Lab, we have a guest who's getting set up. He's plopping down all of his materials and his getting his PowerPoint ready to go so that he can share with us everything about what he's working on in his FileMaker Lab. And my guest today is the other host of this podcast, Cris Ippolite. Howdy, Cris.
Hey, Jeremy. Yep, I'm just getting all my beacons lined up here and my lab coat, and
Yep.
I'm trying to remember the name of the Muppet guy who was in the lab. We'll probably figure that out in a couple episodes, actually.
Bunsen, Honeydew, and Beaker. Yeah.
Hey, it was Beaker, of course. Yeah,
of course.
Glad to be here in the lab with you.
Yeah, well, our FileMaker Lab is open, and we are ready to see what Cris is working on this time in this episode. So, Cris, glad you're here. I hear that you are constantly working on things in FileMaker. You just keep on playing with stuff. Before we get into this, is this always a characteristic of you? Have you always been just tinkering in FileMaker?
I think so. I think it's just a continuation of what got me interested in the platform in the first place, really. And I think the effort that I put into continuing to tinker is that I continue to have hypotheses that I want to try out, and the platform keeps evolving, right?
Yeah.
So I've committed to remain a student of this platform. So I'm always learning. And I think as educators like you and I are, it's a responsibility that we hold to continue to learn and make sure that we're on top of everything. So I think that's probably it. It probably all is because of that mindset.
This idea of tinkering in FileMaker is great. And I did a podcast episode previously in Proofgeist with John Renfrew about tinkering in FileMaker. He and you and other people have been in the platform for so long, and yet you're still feeling the need to tinker around in there and explore and keep your lab open and keep the electricity flowing to it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know what that drive is, but it's a natural curiosity. And also there's something really fun about proving out a hypothesis, like it's a literally like, waving your hand up in the air, like yes type moment. And I need as many of those as I can get.
So what hypothesis are you exploring right now? Just tell us in a title what's going on in your lab.
A FileMaker and machine learning.
Okay. FileMaker and machine learning. And you have a hypothesis in mind.
I do.
Go ahead. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Really my hypothesis is that I feel like every existing implementation of FileMaker can benefit from embellishing the app using machine learning and the tools that we currently have that are supported within the platform right now. I feel really strongly about that. And I'm exercising it with our own customers here at iSolutions, but I'm trying to evangelize this concept a bit too. So that's really what I'm really doing in the lab right now is researching and trying to tell people what kind of stuff I've done and I'm excited about anytime I have a little bit of a discovery. So I try to share it whenever I can.
Did this hypothesis come because FileMaker recently supported core ML machine learning information, or did this predate what FileMaker itself could do?
It's a great question. So in fact, yes, FileMaker really discussed their native support for machine learning when they announced support for core ML, which is in the FileMaker 19 release. And just for, to kind of, give a little bit of context there, core ML is a Mac OS or an iOS feature. There's a kit, like many other kits that are in our operating systems. And the ML one is included on Mac OS. And And while it might seem like a bit of a limitation, I've discovered it maybe isn't as much of one as I thought. So yes, I have absolutely been exploring the native CoreML support, and that pretty much started when I was making new features videos for Claris.com and LinkedIn Learning on how to do CoreML. And at that point, I was doing a lot of vision models. I'm mostly concentrated on general models, which I'm happy to discuss here. But I will say that well in advance of the native support for CoreML, we've had machine learning support within the platform ever since we've been able to connect to APIs. Like literally being able to parse out returning JSON and make those calls via our script engine. It was
Mhm.
really when we got support for
Okay.
machine learning through APIs.
Do you think, as a general rule, people like should you look outside of FileMaker to see what's coming in the tech world and see how it can apply, or is it, or do you just wait for the technology to become part of FileMaker before you start creating hypotheses and tinkering with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I absolutely mandate myself to learn and to absorb whatever these new features are. Mostly because I volunteer to create these videos every time there's a new release, so I have to really I have to figure out a way to, and it's kind of an interesting process, and I'm sure you've been through this as well. I approach it more from a training perspective because that's what the videos are, but it's mostly I have to figure it out. I have to prove it out myself, make sure it works. And then I have to figure out a story, like literally a story that makes sense, that has a beginning, middle, and end, so that people watch a demonstration and go, oh, there's an example of why I would want to use it. I can now see my own use cases, through the trees, so to speak. So that at the very least, that's been when I actually start to implement things within FileMaker. But I've purposely, and this has been a conscious effort, for both myself and sort of the persona at iSolutions as a team. Our tagline that I came up with, or actually someone did for me back in like 1997, was forward thinking, simple solutions. And in our 25th year, that's still today, I really believe that forward thinking is critically important. And I know that some of my contemporaries in this space, maybe as new technologies have come about, maybe they it's not as interesting for them, and you kind of stick with the status quo. For me, it's always been about moving forward and kind of challenging that, getting out of my comfort zone, and that's exactly where machine learning happened for me. Now, specifically, I was working with machine learning, back in like 2007 or something like that, in a side project that had nothing
Oh,
to do with any iSolutions endeavor. So I guess in that case, yes, I was aware of this technology, shocked to find out I could actually integrate it into FileMaker, and then eventually, as time came forward, I'm making sort of business cases for
okay.
this type of thing.
Well, so let's talk about yours. You mentioned your hypothesis. Describe in detail what you're doing, what you're working on in this area.
Oh, absolutely. So the first thing that I was doing, where I was exploring CoreML support, is pretty much like if you just go Google FileMaker and machine learning, you'll see one page worth of results, and everyone's doing the same thing. It's all, here is CoreML doing a vision model, and those are very compelling. They're very easy to understand, and frankly, they're easy models to create. And that's where I started my journey. I said, okay, actually, we all saw an example of this when Robert Holsey was presenting at the last DevCon, where we were all in person, the one in Orlando. And if the people who are watching or listening to this remember, Robert was up on stage, showed an app that was on a phone, and he was talking about like a person who's working on a car, who then pulls a spark plug out and then grabs his phone and takes a picture of it. And then a FileMaker app that was, there was actually a container field in a FileMaker app that invoked the camera in the first place. That picture was consumed by the app and then was sent over to a machine learning model, specifically a CoreML vision model. And that model was trained to say, hey, this is, I'll know every single part in our inventory, every single part that has a record in this inventory database. I'll recognize it when I see it, so to speak. That's what the model was trained to do. So when you take a picture of something, it says, oh, that looks like something that I've been trained to recognize. And then it recognizes it, and you can extract information from it and go search for it in your database. So the same thing Robert did. I did a ton of those. I did, one for Claris.com, another one for LinkedIn Learning. Then I started playing with it. I did like a hot dog, no hot dog. I think that's kind of been a pretty popular thing that people have been doing with this as well. And then I even took like just to have some fun with it. I have like a little like football helmet, little plastic football helmets that I think I used to get from like, I don't know, like A&W root beer or A&W or something like that back in the day. And so I have my collection from when I was a kid. So I scanned every one of them, and then I built an app so that I could take a picture of one and it would recognize what team it was right away. So I was doing a bunch of that, and then just kind of let that sort of settle out there. But for me, and I think people get that when they see the vision models, they understand it. But for me, there was this hidden value for general models, not just the ones that CoreML supports natively within the FileMaker platform, but API driven ones. And I really, really had a strong thirst to kind of see how could we make text models relevant within the FileMaker applications, because I really think we can solve more business problems that way. And that's where I've been spending most of my energy recently.
Okay. Are you enjoying it? Do you enjoy just closing down or shutting the door to your lab and just getting lost for hours on this?
I do. I genuinely do love it. I actually and we're speaking metaphorically about our lab, but I'm for those watching on our YouTube channel, they can see I'm actually in a lab. I have a recording booth that I just recently built in our house a couple of years ago, and I use that as my lab. I have a different machine in here. I have different accounts. So when I'm sitting in here, I'm in this like I do a lot of this focused brain science stuff. I'm kind of obsessed with when I'm not thinking about FileMaker things, and I very much say I'm trying to train my brain when I'm in this room and I literally close the door. I'm just thinking about like cool, creative things and having fun. And yeah, it is fun, except, not every experiment works. Sometimes those beakers explode and they break on the floor. So there's definitely some frustrations as you go, but the wins don't feel as great unless you experience a little bit of the loss, right? So I think it's all part of the process, certainly.
I'm noticing more questions in the community. One just popped up today about using machine learning. Is this is what you're tinkering with? Is it very specialized to just you, or is this something that everybody can start to play with and tinker around?
Well, I would definitely say that everybody is, well, first of all, every single Claris customer, like a license base out there, is a candidate for machine learning. And that's because really the profile of who can benefit from machine learning is anyone with data. And so, of course, we're in the database or app business. So every single customer who has a license of FileMaker has data, right? So that automatically means people should be thinking about this. And machine learning is a little bit mystified, and it sounds, like robots are taking over the world and some of with Elon Musk and all that kind of thing. But as consumers, we are living in a machine learning world. Like you cannot go an hour throughout your day either watching, a screen or being at your computer, or if you have like a smart home or something, you're interacting with models of one way, shape, or form all the time. So this is already, it's very now. So it's a
Okay.
matter of adapting this for business and making it a competitive advantage for our customers. So and one of the most interesting things I found is that the part about creating models, like depending on what technique you use, it's really not that difficult. Those vision models, again, Google it, FileMaker, and machine learning, and you'll see like 5 different people doing the same thing, training a vision model. And I think you'll find in any one of those examples that they're really easy to do. The general models are a little trickier, but I think the best way for people to think about it is it's just a really like hardcore calculation that you can then bring into FileMaker. You can feed
Okay.
it FileMaker data, and it's an engine that we don't have in our calculation system, mostly because general models and most models you're creating with raw data use regression, and we don't have support like natively for regression within our calculation engine. I guess we could to some degree. Um, think maybe address it some way in recursion, but we really don't. If you talk to like data scientists or statistics folks, like we don't have the tools in FileMaker natively to do that. So CoreML or any kind of machine learning models help bring that into our space. So
Right.
like that's what CoreML really does. Is it's a sophisticated calculation that you feed data to, and it pops out predictions based on historical patterns that it detected. And now we have that available to us. So I think that everyone can benefit from this.
It's an interesting idea that we should consider this as a high-powered calculation or whatnot. Everybody who works in FileMaker has data. It I definitely have my own bias, but it feels like this is along the lines of the JavaScript stuff where there might not be much of a reason to ignore it anymore. I don't know how
Totally
hard it
agree.
is to get going with it and such, but especially on Mac OS. But it feels like this is just another tool that we can use and that we don't have to avoid it.
No, I would say, and Jeremy, you and I have had conversations in general about emerging technology in the FileMaker world all the time, and we've noted in those discussions that new trends come and go. They don't go; they actually come, and either people embrace it or they don't. JavaScript is APIs, JavaScript integration, native integrations are probably the most recent examples, and certainly there's a large majority of the developer populace out there that says, well, I'm pretty comfortable with my, what I'm doing in FileMaker and I'm really good at it. I don't need to bring in something that I don't know and then kind of water down my skill set. And I think you could probably get by not doing API integrations, sort of. You probably could get by without doing JavaScript integrations. But I think when you throw machine learning in and then you add it to those two things I just mentioned, because to some degree there could be integrations of all three of those together, I don't think we're going to be able to ignore that much longer.
Okay.
And I actually feel pretty passionate about that. So I think we have a responsibility, if we're charging people for our advice, that we know all the different technologies that are available out there. So it's really important to me and the team here at iSolutions that we're always leaning forward as a result.
I'm gonna go back to a question you were talking about. Just having data, the fact that we have data means that this is a tool that we can use. As you are tinkering around with it, or as you started to, what use cases came to mind? What real world examples came to mind that led you to start playing with this? Or did you just play with this because it was a cool technology? I guess that's a legitimate reason, but
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean,
okay,
well, so for me, I actually was introduced to the concept of machine learning it's through a hobby of mine.
okay,
It's something that we'll put in the show notes and in community and on the YouTube description. But there was recently a Claris video actually about this experience that I had. But in short, I'm a big sports fan. Folks that know me know that I'm a big football fan, and I'm a grown man, so it's a little embarrassing to say this, but I'm also a big fantasy football fan. And I know that sounds like Dungeons and Dragons for jocks or something like that. And I guess it sort of is. But to me, what it is a game where I get to crunch data and make predictions based out of that data and try to best my friends and family with those conclusions. So way back then, and this was like 2005, 2006, I discovered sort of a flaw in the way that the scoring of this game works. And I tried to make it work for me. And I used FileMaker like every day. I created a FileMaker application for this, and I was crunching away all this data and trying to make it work. And I was trying to do averages, and it just wasn't doing what I wanted to. And I think, by the way, averages are evil. They're inconclusive all around. And so all I was doing was trying to weight averages. And so finally, then because of this hobby that I had with sports, and at the time they're just calling it analytics, like this is like this big emerging thing. I went out to these. I used to go every year to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics conferences. I haven't gone since COVID, but this is a yearly thing that I do. And I met a sports statistics professor there who told me, yes, you can't do these as weighted averages. What you need to do is introduce regression. And so then I was like, well, how do I do that? And he and I collaborated together and created models. And at the time I was like calling them algorithms, because everyone called everything an algorithm. And actually everybody calls everything a model now, even though they're not really machine learning models. And ultimately what I collaborated on with this guy, his name's Michael Shuckers, who might be someone we have on the podcast at some point, but he also works with us at iSolutions creating models for our customers now. But we created a machine learning model, solved that problem, and you can watch the rest of the video where you can see that model actually ended up being featured on NFL.com when I was working there part-time. And then also in the past 2 years, it's become it's been rated as a top 5 and top 10 most accurate fantasy football expert in the world. It's not an expert, it's a machine learning model, and it's besting all these humans. So sort of a Casey against the machine thing. That's what got me into understanding what models were and what we needed and how pattern detection works and predictions actually work. So that was really my introduction to machine learning in the first place.
So let's say a person owns a, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
A person owns a printing shop. They print tickets for subway riders. Um, and they're using FileMaker to create an estimate, to create an order for say the New York City Transit Authority, whatever it is. How could they use machine learning to work with the data in their system?
Yeah, I think estimates actually are a really good use case for machine learning models because to be able to identify, and we're doing a series of conversations with iSolutions customers right now where we're trying to educate them on how to identify use cases for machine learning. So if I took this example right now and one of our customers said they were doing that exact project, I would say, well, first of all, we're not trying to force technology on people. We're asking them what problems they would like to solve, and this is a tool that helps them solve problems. But in that case, I would point to estimate accuracies, the accuracy of the bids that are being produced, right? So we all understand the concept of estimated versus actual. So every time you do a bid, you're creating data that is essentially a sort of a guess for an outcome. I mean, we'd like to be, I think the professionals put more effort into just guessing, but the idea is you get better at it as human beings as you try it once and then you go do the work and then you look back on it and you go, oh, well, I thought that was going to be like a 6-hour endeavor and it ends up it was 8 or maybe it was 4 or something like that. So in that case, I would suggest, hey, let's actually log your actuals in, which you're probably storing in that system as time card data anyways, and then create a pattern as far back as we can, like, actually compare the actuals being time card data with how long it actually took to perform a task against what the estimate was to the customer for that printing project. I would see how far back, how many years we have of that. Let's say we've got 5 years worth of that correlated data. I would then create a I would suggest to the customer to create a machine learning model out of that data that looks back and says, well, here's what the project was, and here's where all the tasks, and here's what the actuals were, right? And then I would train a model that says, when you see these tasks, whatever it is, like a type of a task, a specific thing that you're doing, whatever it is, the technologies that are involved, whatever those things are that correlate to what the actual outcome was, I would train a model to predict it. Then I would integrate that into the FileMaker system to then say, all right, now I'm in the bidding process. I'm going to put in whatever those same features were. We call them features, whether it's here's the type of task I'm doing, here's the level of intensity or whatever the things are that we're tracking. And then what it would do is it would actually fill in the blank on what the bid should be. So this is something that our human brains can't do with any accuracy and reliability, but machines can do that 10 times over. So I would actually make that a bidding prediction, an estimator tool in the
Okay.
case that you described.
Wait, let's get back to your tinkering. So you're sitting in your lab there, your room. You've got your head down and you're focused on it. Do you ever run into problems, blockers?
Yeah.
What have those been here, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I I run into blockers all the time. What one of the more frustrating things is when I'm working on something that maybe hasn't been released yet, and I don't even have the documentation published yet. So I'm just kind of chasing my tail, and sometimes I unfortunately just need to give up till I get more information. There's been other times where I'm all the way to recording something for one of my training videos, and I'll realize, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Like, where's the thing for, like, with machine learning when I was doing my initial new features videos that you see on Claris.com and LinkedIn Learning. I was no I noticed in the documentation I was provided there was no way to extract, like, just give me the highest number without some sort of fanciness. And so I was like, that seems like that's something that's missing. I sort of stopped in the middle of the video and then contacted through some of our friends at engineering, eventually found out that there was an unpublished version of the formula, and there was this exact thing that I needed. And so essentially I show only the top result or whatever, which is now, part of it. So sometimes it's those kind of things. And sometimes it's just, it doesn't work. Like, I have an idea and I'm trying to prove it out, and the hypothesis simply is not true. It's just not something that can happen. But then sort of what I'm doing right now, like my most active project that I'm working on right now is this demonstration of machine learning in the concept of home values. And when I first started it, I was like, "Oh, cool! I'm gonna build a model. I'm gonna show people, here's a application that has a bunch of previously sold homes in all these various areas and zip codes, right? And I want to be able to have the system take various features or fields like the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, rooms, garages, square footage, lot size, that kind of thing. And I wanted to be able to predict like what a good asking price should be, for that particular market. And so I was like, oh, that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to do that whole thing. And so I get into it. And, the problem is, and Jeremy, you probably experienced this in your lab as well, is like, there's a level of enthusiasm and only so much time. Like you can get really excited about something. And if you don't see results right away, it might get really frustrating and you might just put it on the shelf. And in this case, that was very much the case. Like, I thought I could knock something out in the first Saturday, but then I just ran into stuff that, created challenges that kind of spread it all out. And then all of a sudden you look back on it, it's a month later and I haven't even completed that first task I was so excited about. But I guess that's how I kind of address the adversity. But I don't know. I just challenge myself to keep going though. I just have that drive to just finish what I started.
Right. Um, Back a while, I asked you, "Is this good for everybody?" And you certainly agreed with that. You talked about that. So, how would one get started? What materials for their lab do they need that they could get started with this?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to get started with machine learning is with the vision models, and that's why pretty much the only stuff you see out there right now is like step by step through vision models. Now, in our show notes, we'll be sharing the video that I did for Claris up on their YouTube page where I created a vision model. Additionally, we'll also share where I created a sentiment model and made an add-on of it. And I showed people in a series of videos the steps in order to be able to do that. I think vision models are a great place to start because they're just easy to understand and they've got a lot of cool factor. From there, I would go to API based models. Like I used to work with this Heidi Porter actually turned me on to this Monkey Learn, which was a service that you could shoot API calls to, and it would give you back JSON, and you would essentially, do. They had models like text extraction, text summary, keyword extraction, that kind of stuff, and you could create your own custom models. And I was playing a lot with that. I think that's a great place to start too with Monkey Learn. There's a Claris Connect connector. The problem is, to be quite honest with you, I worked really closely with Monkey Learn and Claris to get that connector created. And then they sold, and now it's like $6,000 a month. And I would strongly not recommend anybody do that because we found other services. So I guess in general, start with Core ML with vision models because it's super easy. And you can use the Create ML tool that you'll see in the video in our show notes to be able to do it, and it's a breeze. And I go through step by step, and then start going with API ones. So if you know how to do simple API calls and how to parse JSON out, again, one of those emerging tech responsibilities we think everybody should have. If you can do that, you can integrate machine learning into your system. So I think those two things are the way to kind of understand it, understand what information you need, what the data structures are going to be that you need, and then you can start superimposing real world problems that you can solve once you understand the tools.
Okay. Is this taking a lot of time for you? Do you feel like the time you're taking is really worth it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not so sure I can quantify how it's worth it. I mean, other than the fact that like our customers are doing these things. And if it wasn't for me going and figuring it out and then sharing this knowledge with the team here at iSolutions and then moving one step further and not we literally going out and doing evaluations with our customers. If I didn't have an understanding of it, I wouldn't have the confidence to do that in the first place. So yeah, I mean it's making us money for sure. And but it was mostly a cool what's cool kind of curiosity that kind of drug me in this in the first place.
It sounds interesting. I I like what you're doing in your lab. It's fun and exciting, and you're sharing. You shared this stuff on iSolutions. There's some stuff from Claris that's on their site that you've put together and are sharing this information about. Do you have any other stuff, soon? Any other results from your lab coming out
Yeah,
soon?
I'll tell you what. I have this hypothesis right now, Jeremy, that I think is pretty revolutionary. So one of the things, I think we're trying to create a safe space here in this podcast to talk openly and with transparency about the Claris platform. We'll even have some of our friends from Claris on here to talk about some of these challenges. But one of the things when I saw the support for the native support for CoreML, and this is kind of not necessarily just a FileMaker challenge, but machine learning models in general, it's the lack of being able to retrain a model dynamically. And what I mean by that, if we just take the vision model, the thing that everybody understands, imagine you took your entire inventory, did 360 scans of it, put them all into appropriate folders, fed it up to like CreateML or some service that will create a vision model for you. And now you have a model that you can take a picture or drag a picture into a container and it'll recognize what that is with precision. The problem is what happens when you add like 3 products to your inventory, right? The answer is you have to go retrain your model with those products included. And it's not like a ton of work, but there's no like default mechanism to be able to do that. So like you literally have to go take this little model file, toss it away or save it as a version or something, and then go retrain it and create another little output. They're called .ml model files that come out of CoreML, and then throw it back into a container, and now you're updated. So I just thought that was just a limitation that we had to live with. And this year in the lab, all of a sudden I had this like fever dream or something where I was like, oh my goodness, I have this is how we're gonna do it in FileMaker, and I know how we can retrain, and this is gonna be great. So ultimately what I came up with, and it has just been fraught with like speed bumps left and right. So I'm trying to stay like focused because I think it could be pretty revolutionary, is a dynamic in-app retraining or creation of models on the fly. And in order to be able to do that, I am leveraging CoreML. I'm calling CreateML, which is a component that helps you create the models. I'm calling it through command line, which I'm doing within the FileMaker application, and I can feed it any set of data you want. So just a couple of pieces of vocabulary for both of us to be talking the same language, and for those that are listening, the data. So you need to have data that has patterns and outcomes in it that you can use to train your data. So, for example, I'm doing this thing for the homes, the homes that I mentioned. So, I need to have a bunch of columns of data. They're called features, or referred to as features in machine learning. And the feature set that I would have would be bedrooms, bathrooms, lot size, home square footage, number of floor, whatever it is, like the stuff that I determined. And by the way, it's not just guesses. Like you pick some features and then you run your model and you get a lot of tuning information back. Like you get information back on how precise this was, and so then you can start leaving some of the columns or features, or fields is really what they are, leave some of the fields out of your training data until finally you get a set that has great precision. So those are just fields in FileMaker. And so if you think about it, if I have the rooms, floors, square footage, whatever, and then I have this other column of what the house actually sold for. Okay. That's my target field. So that's the field that I'm going to get my model to predict when the model's created on data that I'm going to create in the future. So in that case, I create all this data, so you need to know what table it's coming from, what fields it is, and then also the found set of the data that you're sending is critically important. I think it probably makes sense if you look at it in the context of this home sales. Like I had I don't know, it was like 50,000 homes in this sampled set of data that I was using to create these models. And I'm going to have videos on this, and maybe even by the time this pod comes out. So definitely, keep checking iSolutions Inc. YouTube for updates, or subscribe, and you'll see it when it comes out. But the point is, I'm essentially creating a found set in a context of a table using certain fields in FileMaker. And then I'm exporting that out as a CSV to like a temporary location. And then I'm doing a command line call to CreateML, a service that's on Mac OS, to take that data and train a model. Then it creates a model, and then I consume that model file into a container, and now I can run it against data, and it's live. So all that can happen behind the scenes. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, I don't want all 50,000 home values to tell me what like a home estimate would be. Like I live in Newport Beach, California, and like all my family lives back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. our home values are not the same. Like you can send it the same number of rooms, and it's unfortunate for the folks in California, but I need to localize that data. So I would need to create a found set of just Newport Beach, California homes with those criteria, and then send that and create a model. So what I came up with was a dynamic way that inside the app, you can pick which table context you want, and then choose from the fields that are attributes within that table, which fields you want to have as your features. And then from those fields, pick which one you want to be your target field, and then automatically create a model on the fly. And then store a library of models within your application that all sorts of users can create on the fly. People can have their own hypotheses and experiment with them with the data and see what the tuning information and the precision information is that comes back, and really encourage users to, I mean, all they have to do is know how to understand table context and pick fields that are meaningful and create a found set. And I think most users can do that, right? So what I've done is I've come up with a way to retrain models and create models on the fly that can then be stored in a library and sort of a version tree. I'm calling them model trees, that then can be stored and referenced, by users over time. So that's my big hypothesis right now. But the problem is like just getting it to where I could dynamically pick a table and then show the fields on screen and then pick a target field. That's been taking me a lot of hours in the lab, and that part's not too sexy. So, I'll spend a whole Saturday just doing boring FileMaker stuff that has nothing to do with my machine learning hypothesis, just to kind of get to where I need to.
Very good. Well, it sounds like your lab is busy, busy with all sorts of awesome stuff. Do you have something next that you're thinking about
Yeah.
exploring, or another hypothesis?
Well, literally this weekend, I am doing it of another video in a series that I've been doing. I've been showing people how to create their own sentiment model, which is a very popular machine learning model. It takes text and tells you whether or not the tone of the text is positive or negative. It's pretty simple. I did an example of it a couple of years ago in a DevCon presentation where or actually it was like a technology keynote or something like that. It was like for students, social emotional learning students who can pick from a series of happy faces to say what mood they're in that day. Well, I took it a step further and I said, hey, tell me how your day is going. And they just write a couple sentences. And this model then comes back and says, oh, that's positive or negative with a certain percent precision. So I showed people how to create a model. I created a model with like 800,000 rows of training data, which was pretty awesome. And then I showed an example of integrating the model to do sentiment, analysis. Now I'm going to create an add-on for that and give it away for free so that people can work with machine learning models as sort of a training tool to show people the scripts and the table context that are necessary for them to make their own. That's the next thing I'm doing is integrating in sentiment. But really, the retraining thing is probably that's my white whale, I think, this summer.
Okay, very nice. Well, we'll close up the lab here, but before we do, I'm curious, just as you're playing with machine learning and CoreML, or generally, what is something that you wish for the Claris platform?
Well, I guess I have two different hats. If I had the trainer hat, I would like it if they just took a nice clean pass against the UI and like made it universal. So, for example, people are probably staring at this all the time, but you might not even notice that the button that means you can invoke a calculation dialog within FileMaker, I think there's like 7 different buttons now. Like we knew it as a specify button, and then sometimes it's a little pencil icon, sometimes it's 3 dots. Like there's a bunch of them. And as a trainer, I just want people to recognize a certain thing and go, yes, in this context, when I hit that button, it'll invoke a dialogue. So I would love it if they just like took a week and just said, like, make sure that everything looks the same. And I know why it happened, because over 30 years, there's different engineers coming in and out of it and leaving their mark. But I think a nice broad stroke to clean that up would be great. But, as a developer, I strongly, strongly, strongly believe that the relationship graph is not equipped for the tasks, and that there should be a separation from base tables and query relationships. in the UI. And I think it's too late for FileMaker to do that. But luckily, the folks over at Claris understand that. And I think in the stuff that we're going to see in the future, like in the Magnolia product and other things that are coming, we're going to see that users don't even have to interact with relationships or queries. That's kind of done on the fly. So I hope all my screaming about that over the years has influenced that to some degree. So that's kind of my wish list today.
And what is something that you engage in that's non-FileMaker-y?
Well, it unfortunately it is also well, I'll give you one answer that seems on brand for me, and then one random one, and then we can be done with it. But the first one is machine learning model related. I am absolutely obsessed with the GPT-3 and Codex models. I've been working with my API keys on those. I look forward to telling the FileMaker community some amazing things, and even talking about that on the pod. I don't want to get into it now. It's a topic for a future pod. So I'm it is terrifying and fascinating at the same time. And then I guess in general, I'm just sort of, I've gotten obsessed with rowing. So I'm trying to figure out ways that I can pull rowing data, off of my rowing machine and even out on the water to sort of see if I could use tech to see if I'm improving at all. So
Very nice.
at least one thing that didn't have to do with machine learning in this conversation.
Well, thank you, Chris, for bringing all your materials and demonstrating what you're working on in your lab. I didn't want to come to your lab because you have everything in a certain place, so I didn't want to disturb your room. But
I think you
but
know
you
me
brought
too
it all
well.
here, and you've let us know what's going on. So thank you for that. And we'll. I know you'll be with me as a co-host sometimes, but we'll
Yeah.
revisit your lab later on.
Yeah,
And see what's going
I
on.
appreciate it. And I think this is the part of the presentation where I reveal to everybody that this has actually been a deep fake of me and a machine learning model of Chris's voice the whole time. So gotcha.
No, that's not true. That's not
Or is it?
true. All right, Chris.
Thanks,
Have a good day.
Jeremy.
Bye
You
bye.
too. Take care.